Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we continue our look at the testimony of the possible conspirators. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my punctual co-host, Alice.
Oh, Brett, I deserve it. I deserve it. Hi, Brett. Good to see you.
Hi, Alice.
Even though
Good to see
I
you too.
almost missed our recording session because apparently I even saw it on the calendar and thought, must be a typo.
Yes. She actually was very punctual because once I told her it's here on a Friday night, and I'm like, shoot, Alice, she doesn't know about the recording. I mean, she could be anywhere. She could be out with friends. She could be at a dinner party. She could be dancing somewhere.
Do you want to keep rubbing it in that this is my life?
She was like, oh, we're recording? Okay, I'll be there in 30 seconds. And here she is. So here we go.
Oh, you guys. Well, good thing that I'm so punctual because we have been recording this trial like mad. The reason I missed recording tonight, by the way, is this is our 6th time to record in 5 days. If you do your math, more recordings than days. So I've lost track. And we've been doing that because we're trying to coincide with the end of trial. It's not going to happen, but we're still going to rush through all of it because it's still all online for you to watch. There's still lots of questions and there's still a lot to be said.
And we're going to rush through it with quality. You're not going to miss out on anything. But yeah, by the time you hear this, the trial will be over. The verdict will have been delivered, or there will have been a hung jury. So you guys are a little bit ahead of us. But look, I think this is going to be one of those cases that people talk about for a long time. So we'll do it justice. We'll try and wrap it up as quickly as possible, but we want to go through all these witnesses, and we've been moving through them. And as I said in the introduction, we're in the heart of the conspirators. If you believe this is a conspiracy, just conspirator after conspirator after conspirator is up on the stand. And they all look like ordinary people with ordinary lives. But if you believe the defense, they actually are either murderers or accessory to murder, or accessories to murder. So we're now to Nicole Albert. Now, Nicole Albert is Brian Albert's wife. You may recall, this is the Albert household where this occurs. It's in the Albert household where, according to the defense, John O'Keefe was either lured into the basement and murdered in sort of a premeditated attack, or something went horribly wrong and he was murdered, and then a cover-up was necessary. Nicole is Brian Albert's wife. She and some friends were at the Waterfall Bar drinking White Claws. Oh yeah, there you go. Nicole did not know Karen, and she had only met John once or twice before. She said the mood at the bar was good. Everyone was just hanging out. Reed arrived, so did John. And according to her, someone who you would think would have a very large incentive to say that Karen was sloppy drunk. She said she didn't appear drunk to her at all. But Nicole did not speak to her much either, so it's possible she just didn't have any interactions. Nicole, Brian Albert, and their daughter Caitlin drove home. They had invited everyone else to come home as well because it was Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday and they wanted to wish him a happy birthday. They saw Colin Albert, who was still at the house celebrating that birthday, and he said someone was coming to pick him up, and he was gone a couple minutes later. By the way, if you haven't been following this, the defense theory, at least one of them, is that in fact, Colin did not leave, but was hiding in the basement, possibly, waiting on John. He had this beef with John, and this was his opportunity to get even. While this is going on, Brian Jr. is there with some girls that he knows. They're listening to music. Nicole wishes him a happy birthday, and she starts cleaning up a bit. Typical mom, right? She's cleaning up, even as the party is still going. Brian Higgins, our ATF agent friend, arrives, and he's followed shortly thereafter by the McCabe's. They had some more drinks. People stayed till around 2. They talked, they sang, they danced. Higgins left first, then the McCabe's. Brian's friends went with the McCabe's, and then Caitlin left when her boyfriend picked her up. Nicole neither saw nor heard anything unusual, and John and Karen never came inside.
And that's really interesting. She was very emphatic, right? And literally the prosecution says, are you doing the mom thing of cleaning up while, the party's still going on? And because she doesn't know John and Karen super well, you would think that that would stand out in her mind if they came in her house. And she is emphatic, and she does not hesitate at all when asked, did John O'Keefe come to your house? And she said, no, absolutely not. Did Karen Reed come into your house? No, absolutely not. And one thing that kind of stuck out to me in her direct was they were kind of setting up what their home is like, right? They have 5 children. I think they're mostly grown, they all drive cars, that sort of thing. Not everyone lives at home. And she notes that they always lose the key to the front door. And because they have lots of kids, they kind of just leave the front door open because it's a trusting place. That stood out to me because obviously we're about to, if you buy the defense's theory that there's this massive conspiracy for murder, you would think if you're part of that conspiracy, you're looking over your shoulder a good bit. You know what people are capable of, that people are planning murders, that if there's a planned murder, there could be retaliation. There are people capable of this. Just because you're part of a conspiracy may then give you insight that there are other conspiracies that may involve you that you may not know. Yet here we have a family who has friends over, and at the end of the night, when everyone leaves around, she's going up to bed at 2:30, the door's unlocked. Probably. She doesn't even know because she says the door's always unlocked because that's the type of house they run with so many kids coming in and out. So she goes to bed that night around 2:30 and I guess early morning, but she doesn't sleep for long because around 6:30 a.m., the defense is later going to say it was actually 6:45, but sometime in that 6 a.m. hour, very early, Jen McCabe, her sister, came bursting into her bedroom hysterical. And Nicole doesn't know what's going on. She immediately sits up in bed, and so does her husband. And she just hears Jen say, he's out in the snow, and we don't know if he's okay. Nicole is shocked and asked who Jen is talking about because she automatically assumes it's about one of her kids or about one of Jen's kids. She had no idea what was going on. She had not heard any fire trucks. She hadn't seen any flashing lights. She had been asleep. Now, Jennifer had called her a couple of times, but Nicole never spoke to her. Jen then tells her it's John. It's John who's outside. So this is, in Nicole's own words, the first time she hears about what's going on. She's been asleep through all of this. Really, she fell asleep like 4 hours earlier. So a night of fun and staying up late. I could understand that. Nicole was interviewed by state police a few days later. And as we now know, a couple years later, about a year later, they sold the house in April of 2023. But they had first contacted a realtor in late 2021. So before John's death, they had already contacted a realtor. So if you can try to make something of it, but it sounds like they had kind of been planning to sell this house for some time. Now, Nicole was cross-examined by the defense's counsel, Elizabeth Little. She's the younger defense attorney, and we haven't heard from her as much in this trial thus far. On cross, the defense asked several questions about that ATF agent, Brian Higgins, and her husband's play fighting at the bar. It's also, the defense counsel describes Brian as this highly trained fighter, this killer. And Nicole denies it. She's like, he's not this highly trained fighter. And she also doesn't give in to this whole, she's like, it's just play fighting. Like, there's nothing more to it than that. But the defense really tried to make something of it, but she doesn't budge. And, you know, if you watch her testify, she has a very kind of, it's not an upfront demeanor at all. You know, she seems very trustworthy. She's just answering the questions before her, and she doesn't buy into the baiting of the questions, either by the prosecution or the defense. I'll give her that, you know, because she is a prosecution witness, but she's not really led along. She's like, this is what happened. This was at my house. It is what it is. She's very matter of fact.
And we're going to hear a lot about this play fighting throughout this trial. And I just want to go back to something someone said when we started this. Someone thought we got it wrong and said, look, there's no allegation here. This is a premeditated conspiracy. Some accident happened. And I totally get why you would want to think that, because that's a much more believable story, that something terrible happened in that house and they had to cover it up. As much as they hated the fact that John died, they had to cover it up to protect someone else in the family. The defense does not present that. That is not the story they're presenting. This play fighting thing is presented by the defense with multiple witnesses as Brian Higgins and Brian Albert almost training. Like, he's showing him holds. They're working out essentially what they're going to do later to John, that this is a practice session, which when they show it, they finally show it. My wife is my conscious in this, because I make her, she ends up watching a lot of the trial with me. And so she had been watching it and building up to this play fighting thing. And they finally show the video of these two overweight old white dudes doing this grab ass thing in the bar. And she's like, wait, that's what they've been talking about this whole time? And it is, but they're going to continually return to this because it is a key part of their story, that this really was something orchestrated from even before they left that bar to get John there and to attack him.
And I'll say this much. In watching that scene of the quote unquote play fighting, if that is what you think a trained killer looks like, don't walk into dark alleys, man, because when you meet a real trained killer, you're going to be in for a world of hurt. And that's exactly what it looks like. It looks laughable, right? It's like a couple of honestly older guys goofing around. No one even really pays attention to them.
And I'm sure when he got out of the Marines in 1992, he probably was a pretty vicious guy. I mean, not vicious, but you probably wouldn't want to mess with him. But his days are behind him.
And I'll note this, for those of you who haven't seen the video, it's clearly joking, right? If you've ever been in a bar when a fight really broke out, I assume you have, Brett. I have, right?
I absolutely have.
Yeah, college, law school. If you've ever watched SEC football, you've probably been in a bar when things got a little heated, especially if people had too many drinks, and everyone reacts immediately, right? Like, people push back their chairs or they get away from what's happening, right? Nothing like that happens. It's not like they start play fighting and everyone jumps into action like, whoa, try to break it up, or it is not a heightened mood during this play
fighting. By the way, I understand that the little guy and little lady are watching. So, hey, guys, so keep it clean, Alice.
Keep it very clean,
dropping in your
little Brett and Bretty. They're the best. We already used the name Brittany, so I don't know what to call her. They are the best. And you guys should go to sleep sometime.
Brashly.
Brashly. Oh, it's terrible. Okay, guys, I know you've been waiting for this, but of course Nicole is going to be asked about one of the leading contenders for murder, and that's going to be Chloe, the German Shepherd. There's an extensive discussion of Chloe, the Albert's 70-pound German Shepherd. And it's a German Shepherd mix, I should note, because, by the way, the way German Shepherds are, and this is actually really difficult to get them adopted out, is if you have a drop of German Shepherd, you're counted as a German Shepherd mix because people are afraid of the viciousness of German Shepherds. By the way, German Shepherds are the sweetest things ever. Like any animal who's not trained, they can do harm. So can a Chihuahua. So, and 70 pounds is actually not that big for a German Shepherd. My German Shepherd was 120 pounds.
Hulking beast.
No, right. And that's a great point. I grew up, a 70-pound dog is actually mid-size. German Shepherds frequently get to be over 100 pounds. And that's why I note that this is a German Shepherd mix. If you have some like intense canine dog who took down Osama bin Laden, this is not it. But they ask her about Chloe, and the defense tried to describe this as some huge German Shepherd, lumbering, a killer dog, just like her father, this trained, skilled killer. It's just not true. Chloe was good with strangers, but she would get into it with other dogs, and she had bitten another dog's owners during one of those dog fights in May of 2022. So after having to pay the medical bills for that dog's owner, the Alberts decided to rehome the dog in Vermont. And this rehoming is presented as some sort of cover-up by the defense, who alleges the dog was part of the Alberts' assault on John. I don't know that you need to put the dog in witness protection because, it's not like fingerprints or DNA are going to, bleed back to the dog. They probably rehomed the dog because of that one incident. Because once a dog bites someone one time, neighbors can get angry. It gets to be an issue once they have a bite thing on their record, right? That one incident could have led to the rehoming.
Now, Alice, you say they couldn't compare the DNA, but they could compare the DNA to the canine DNA found on John's clothing. Oh, wait, they actually are going to look for DNA. We're going to talk about that later. And there is no canine DNA on John or his clothing. So somehow Chloe, the 70-pound superdog, attacked John, bit him several times, but left no DNA behind. And then the Alberts, master conspirators that they are, somehow created this dogfight that resulted in a bite, so they then could rehome the dog. What a great excuse. This conspiracy is so advanced and just so breathtaking. You'd think these people were all members of the CIA and not just random folks from Canton, Massachusetts. But I am going to add Chloe the dog and Nicole Albert to the conspiracy because I don't know how you can avoid having both of them be a part of it, at least based on what the defense is saying. I think if you want to go with the defense's theory, then Chloe has to be a conspirator because, they're putting half the witnesses they're putting on are trying to show that this could have been an animal attack. So they are invested in Chloe being a part of this. And then obviously Cole has to be a conspirator as well.
Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Here's the thing. If this were a conspiracy, the dog is your cover-up, right? Like, if you sick the dog on the person, you say, the dog went crazy and killed him. Not us, who are his friends, who can go to prison, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like,
And then we're going to have to put this poor dog to sleep after this vicious attack. I mean, they were willing to rehome the dog, so it's not as if they weren't willing to
take measures to protect others, right? I mean, truly, if your method of killing someone was by dog attack, what a fantastic cover up for the actual murder, because the dog's not going to go to prison. Now, they probably will put the dog down, but they also got rid of the dog, right? Like, I mean, at this point,
if it's your kid or your dog,
you're going to pick your dog, not your kid, right?
And if you've already got the dog's attacked him, how hard is it to say, you know, the dog jumped up on him, clawed at him, because obviously didn't bite him, and knocked him down the stairs. He fell down the stairs. Tragedy.
Or, you know what? John is dead. Say that John provoked the dog. You know, I mean, like, John can't speak up for himself. I mean, there's so many. I don't understand a conspiracy that protects the dog, because you have a conspiracy to protect the people in the conspiracy. So you use the dog as a weapon, and then that is your scapegoat. But this is like a little bit backwards. So I'm not exactly sure why the dog is part of the conspiracy. The dog is the tool of the conspiracy.
And it keeps the conspiracy completely inside. I mean, you know, framing Karen Reed is such a dangerous thing, because if Karen Reed, it's not hard for her. If you murdered John, it's actually not hard for her, you would think, to be able to show that she wasn't involved. You know, when you looked at her vehicle telematics, there would be no example of her backing up at over 20 miles an hour. How fortunate is it for the conspirators that she just so happened on this day when they decided to frame her to have done that? I mean, what luck. I mean, these people are just so sophisticated. I think after this is over and Karen Reed is acquitted, because they obviously did it, I think the United States government probably should talk to these people and work with them on how to overthrow, like, the Castro regime in Cuba.
Yeah.
Because they have got it down.
Well, you know how the government, like, contracts with hackers, like real hackers, to try and find flaws in our, like, entire meta universe. They should do that, because they've cracked every code. Every conspiracy can be taken down by them, because this is so incredibly sophisticated. Get that dog back from Vermont, because that's, you know, that dog has cracked all the canine codes.
And, like, look, I'm sorry if I'm coming off as a little flippant about this, but now, having spent a whole lot of time in this trial and all the really interesting questions about intent and accidents and everything else, the more I hear about this conspiracy and the more testimony I hear, the more just utterly absurd it is, and it's only going to get worse. So now we move to Brian Albert. And Brian Albert is a Boston cop. He's been a Boston cop for 30 years before retiring. The weekend before John's death, Brian, his brother Kevin, and Brian Higgins, the ATF agent we've talked about before, had gone to a police officer's funeral in New York City. They came back and they picked up Brian's vehicle, and Brian and Higgins went to the Hillside Bar. He then heard from his wife that they were at the waterfall, and so he went over. Jenny McCabe was there, who he had known since she was 6 or 7. Jen McCabe. She was like a little sister to him. John arrived about 30 minutes later with Karen. Albert said he knew John. He did not know him well. He knew him to be a Boston cop who had stepped up to raise his niece and nephew after their parents had died. Brian knew that he was a friend of his brother Kevin, and even though he didn't know him well, he considered him a friend. He met Reed the week before with John. The night of his death, Brian said everyone, including Karen, was in a great mood. They talked about going to the pizza shop, which has come up a couple times. Karen really wanted to go, but that didn't happen. Nicole suggested that they could come back to their house. Since it was Brian Jr.'s birthday, everybody could come over, wish him a happy birthday, and then go on their way. Albert, his wife, and daughter went back to their house. Higgins would show up later as well. Brian said that Colin left right after the Alberts arrived, maybe 5 minutes later. After Colin left, the McCabes arrived. He let Chloe out back, Brian did, and then he put her back in her room before heading to the kitchen. He said everybody was drinking, listening to music, and talking. At some point, he and Brian went upstairs to look at some military photos. Brian had been in the Marines, and in fact, if you see that flagpole, he has an American flag and a Marine flag flying underneath it. At around 1:30, Brian Higgins left. At that point, Brian went upstairs and watched TV in his bedroom. He said that John and Karen never came into the house.
So Brian then testifies that he woke up when his sister-in-law, Jen, burst into the room at around 6:30. So really mirroring what his wife, Nicole, just testified about. He testified that Jen was hysterical and she was saying John was dead. Brian, at this point, looks outside and he saw emergency vehicles in his front yard. Brian didn't go outside because he knew that the responders were working the scene, and being a police officer, he knew he shouldn't be in the way. He went downstairs and Officer Lank was already downstairs. Brian testified that he spoke to the police for about 10 or 15 minutes. And Julie Albert showed up with donuts, at which point they told her what happened. So Julie didn't know what was going on. This also aligns with what Julie had testified about earlier. Brian was interviewed by a state trooper and Michael Proctor on January 29th, so a few days later, even though, remember, he did speak to police on the spot, really within, minutes, hours of him finding out about John being dead. Then on cross-examination, the defense did the standard "how much were you prepped" line of questioning, which is, it's honestly more of an act to do that. You can't ask it. It's kind of a waste to ask that. The whole point is to try and make it seem like they are being coached to say something because they are clearly working with, I guess, prosecutors in this instance to make sure that their conspiracy is covered up. So that's the point of this line of questioning. It's a pretty typical question. Honestly, it's a waste of time. You're probably not going to uncover some real wrongdoing. So the whole point is to try to make the jury think that you are being coached and what you're saying is a lie. So then the defense counsel moves on and talks about this whole play fighting at the bar between Brian and the ATF agent Brian Higgins. This went on for much too long. It went on for a long time.
We must have watched that video 10 times.
Yeah, I mean, it went nowhere. But obviously the questioning kept trying to be like, this was like your basic training for the next kill, right? And it's like, no, this is exactly what you see. A couple of guys goofing around. So then there's more discussion of whether Higgins was a close friend or just a friend. Now, Albert said he considered him a friend. Not a close friend, but they, had served together. They knew each other and they had a lot in common. The defense then asked if Higgins was upset seeing John O'Keefe with Karen Reed, as Higgins was interested in Karen. Brian was like, no. Brian said no one seemed like they were in a bad mood, upset, or overly intoxicated, repeating what he had said, what actually we've heard from every single witness thus far. I don't think anyone has said that there were heightened emotions from anyone at this point. And so the defense is trying to bait Brian into saying that Higgins was angry because he had feelings for Karen. And Brian doesn't take the bait. Then Brian moves on to after the Waterfall Bar, when everyone goes back to his home, and Brian testifies that John never came into his house that night, but he wished he'd had. Because step back from this whole conspiracy for a moment. This guy has had someone, friend or not friend, close enough that they served together, dead in his front yard. You could have a stranger dead in your front yard, and that's traumatic. Obviously, if you think he's part of the conspiracy, not as traumatic. But he and Nicole have literally woken up to a scene. No one wants a dead person in their front yard. Certainly not someone that they've been hanging out with that night, someone that they know. Then Brian goes on to say when he got home that night after leaving the bar, Colin Albert, Brian Jr., and two of their female friends were sitting at the kitchen table. One thing that I want to note as they're describing this party, because we've heard about this party so much, for some reason in my mind, because I was thinking of some murder cabal, it was like this was some hopping party, I don't know, college style, or people doing shots. I don't know. This was just friends hanging out around a kitchen table. Right? There were drinks being had, but it does not sound like it was an after party from college, for example.
Later in the night, while the murder is happening, they are going to be dancing around with umbrellas to It's Raining Men. That's what's going on at this party while Chloe and the nephew and the two Bryans are beating John to death in the basement.
Right. This is like your parents' party. This is not a college bar after party. So the defense noted that Colin was a big guy. Colin is 6 feet tall, and he's about 17 or 18 years old, and he weighed 175 pounds, and he was good at football. He was athletic. The defense attorney, Alan Jackson, noted that he was a big boy, bigger than Alan Jackson, but Alan Jackson's not particularly large.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a great comparator.
This is one of those, like, the jury can see you, Jackson. Like, this is not going great for you. If Jackson was some big guy, then the jury would be like, oh, I see what you mean. But when you're kind of a small person to begin with, look, as a small person, I'm not casting any dispersions, but, like, I get it. It doesn't make the point very much here. So this is to reiterate the theory, though, that Colin beat John O'Keefe to death, and the family is now covering up what Colin did. I mean, I have to say 6 feet is, like, tall. It's not ginormous. 175 is average. You know, like maybe 160, 165 maybe is like average. I don't know what the average is, especially for that age. But 175, we're not talking about some bodybuilder who's like 250 pounds of pure muscle, right? Like, he's kind of an average to taller guy.
Look, he could take Alan Jackson. Could he take a grown man in his prime who's a police officer and who's trained in various, defense tactics? Could he take that guy and do it, by the way, without that guy didn't land any punches, didn't do any damage himself, no defense wounds. Somehow, could he do that? I mean, I don't know. And look,
you know how he could do it? You know how he could do it? If he had a 75-pound killer dog with him.
Oh, that's right. Latched onto his arm. Sort of gently latched onto his arm, though. Not so much that you would puncture the skin, just you'd kind of scrape it. So
just enough to kind of scare you and say, I'm 70 pounds. Can you feel it?
70 pounds of pure killer. And anyways, and once again, I'm not trying to mock this sophisticated theory that the defense has come up with, but I just want to remind everyone that how many people now have been accused of being a part of this crime? Now we've added the 17-year-old, accusing him of being a murderer. He's enjoyed, I'm sure, living with that over the last couple of years as he's been accused of that. We're going to meet him later. We're about to meet Brian Albert Jr., who has an anxiety disorder, but he apparently was also part of this. And you've got this guy who, once again, I mean, decorated police officer, former Marine, older, overweight guy, also part of this conspiracy to commit this murder while it's raining men, is blasting, upstairs. That's the theory that the defense wants you to believe. And I will say this, if we're going to get to, eventually, this case will be decided. It already has been. So maybe the defense has won a overwhelming victory and good for them for accomplishing their goal. Though, as we said last time, if they do that, it will be because of Trooper Proctor, not because of them. But if they lose, if Karen Reed is convicted of second-degree murder, this is going to be one of the reasons, because this is the strategy they picked, as opposed to some other strategies that might have been more fruitful. And so I think this is a legitimate thing to discuss.
Yeah. And talking about time frame real quick. So they finish up basically by asking Brian where he is the rest of that night. And Colin is not there very long. Brian went to the bathroom, and by the time he came back, Colin had left.
So at this point, the defense transitions back to their basement theory and whether you could move something heavy out of the basement without going upstairs, which Albert said you could. Though why you would need to, since everybody's in on this conspiracy, I don't know. So the defense asked him questions about a motion that the defense had filed to have cell phones preserved, because the defense was under the impression they were actually going to get these people's cell phones, which, of course, they did not get. But they were, when you file that, you're going to have a preservation motion, which will be granted temporarily just to keep people from getting rid of anything that you want to have. Albert said that by the time he received this letter about the motion in September 2022, he'd upgraded his phone for his birthday. This, of course, becomes he destroyed his phone. He destroyed his phone to prevent the big bad defense attorneys from getting it. Now, what's interesting about this is their chief conspirator, Jen McCabe, they have everything from her cell phone, because her cell phone was forensically searched and everything else. So you would think that anything Brian Albert was doing as part of this conspiracy would be in Jen McCabe's phone. You would also think that a lot of the data you would need wouldn't actually be on the phone. So things like, where he's pinging, is he in the house or is he out in the front yard dumping a body? That kind of stuff isn't going to be destroyed with a cell phone. But this becomes like a thing with the defense. They destroyed his cell phone And he did that to prevent them from getting it. Now, I'll just say this. If he did destroy it to prevent him from getting it before he got a preservation order, which legally required him to keep it, because if he had gotten that, he should have kept it, good for him. Because one thing I don't understand is the hypocrisy in this case. No one, presumably, would say that if you're accused of a crime by the police, you should just voluntarily give over everything, give a statement, everything else. What we always say is, get a lawyer, know your rights, all this other stuff. But for some reason, when it's this guy, he's supposed to just turn over his phone with all the various pictures that Alice likes to talk about that are probably on there to a defense counsel who wants to destroy him, who wants to either frame him for a murder or uncover the fact he committed it. He's supposed to just freely give that to that guy and be happy to do it because he wants to be open and upfront. And like I said, that is hypocrisy, and people need to, the treatment of the defendant and the treatment of the random people who are accused of a murder by people who aren't even in law enforcement, that is so bizarre to me, and I don't understand why we do that in true crime.
Amen to that. Absolutely.
Okay, so we get through that. Like I said, it ended up not mattering since the defense request to review his and other people's phones were denied. He was asked about the dog, whether it likes strangers. The defense, as we said, has focused on this dog being rehomed, though that wasn't done until May. So they waited a long time. They took a big chance keeping the dog. And then the dog murder weapon, rather than keeping it close to make sure, nobody could find anything out about that dog, they sent the dog away to where who knows who might have access to it. That was what they decided to do. The defense suggests that this was because that was when the questions were raised about whether the injuries to John were caused by a dog. Though, if the Alberts were part of the conspiracy, they would already know that. So if they knew the dog could cause the injuries, part of the conspiracy might be faking an accident for the doggie. And the doggie ends up cremated. And then, we never have to worry about this. As the Alberts have said, we all know where the dog is. It's in Vermont, despite conspiracy theories on Twitter that John actually killed the dog. And that was why. Like, John and the dog got into a fight, this vicious brawl that resulted in minor scratches. And he killed the dog, and that was why this happened. Probably not a good theory and not one the defense goes with, and I will give them credit for that. The defense also asked about Albert not coming out to assist, which is absurd. Of course he did not do that because he would not interfere with the first responders who were out there. It is so bizarre to suggest that Brian Albert, while ambulances and firefighters are out there doing their thing, should be running out in his underwear with blankets to perform CPR on John. That is apparently what the defense wants you to believe he should have done. Obviously, he says he did not do that.
He would absolutely be in the way, and because he may or may not be a witness, he would be asked to step aside. If he looked outside and no one was there, except for a dead body or someone who was hurt outside, then yes, that would make sense why he would run out. But the fact that the scene is already contained, right? There's already people on site. He does not need to insert himself because he knows he will actually probably be asked to step aside. So then Brian Albert was asked if the police had ever photographed his entire home, the home before they sold it. And Albert said he wished they'd had. The defense, and he says that, by the way, because it's become this whole thing, right? It's like proving the negative now. He's like, I have nothing to hide. So yeah, I kind of wish they had because your absurd theory would maybe have fewer legs. The defense then questioned him about his fighting ability and training in the police department. So obviously he has been trained because he's a police officer, but they try to make this seem like he is this, again, trained, skilled killer. Then on redirect, the prosecutor noted that John O'Keefe would have received the exact same training because they worked in the same police department. So whatever training Brian got from the police department, it would be training for all Canton police officers, and guess who was a Canton police officer? The victim. And not to mention, John was actually a good bit younger than Albert, so probably had the upper hand in terms of physical ability to ward off an attacker who had the exact same training as himself, meaning he could probably foresee what moves Brian had. Then we return back to the cross-examination. We return yet again to the video of Brian and Higgins play fighting at the bar for, I don't know, Brett, the 1000th time. So the conversation then turned to 2:22 a.m. when Brian has a call to Higgins that lasted 1 second. This was an accident, according to Albert, and he did not answer the return call that Higgins made 17 seconds later that itself lasted 22 seconds. So you can imagine, you see on the phone record, 1 second. What does that mean? It means probably got hung up immediately before anyone picked up. And then the person called back. This has happened to me all the time where I accidentally butt dial someone and then they call me back and I'm like, forget it. I don't need to like pick up the phone and tell them.
And all these people have Apple iPhones, which let this be a lesson to you. iPhones, I don't know what it is, but you have so many more butt dials with an iPhone than you do with the amazing, wonderful Android. And I'm not sure why that is, but people with Apples are always butt dialing me. It's like, it happens all the time. I don't know what it is about Apples. I don't know.
I don't either. I will say, not even just on anecdotes, like when we're reviewing phone records, Brett, in our case files, there's so many more like the 1 second, 2 second, 3 second calls, which are clearly calls that don't go through all the way or are ended before they're actually connected. So Albert said he was, quote, hanging out. This is a euphemism, in his room with his wife at the time. So Albert said he was hanging out, this is just a euphemism, with his wife in their room at the time. And that's why he didn't answer the call. Perfectly normal. He's married to her. They have 5 children. This is their own home. So there's nothing weird about that. But he's forced to explain why he did not pick up this call to explain to Higgins, sorry, butt dial. And Albert told Brian Higgins the next day, I'm sorry, that was probably a butt dial. Albert did call Higgins the next day at 7:20 a.m. after all this chaos began, after Jen McCabe burst into his room around 6:30 and said that John was dead outside. He called other people as well to let them know what had happened. And the defense asked Brian if instead the calls were to coordinate the stories, including with Canton detective Kevin Albert and Chief Berkowitz. Albert said unequivocally, absolutely not. Here's the thing. It has to be one or the other. If it was this massive conspiracy, you don't need to get your stories aligned the next morning when the police are already outside your window. So
yeah,
then
you better have it ready to go.
You better have it ready because they're already literally at your front door. And so then you'd have to say, okay, this was an accident, and then just the cover up is conspiracy. We've talked about this before. So not only do you need to make sure you understand who is part of this conspiracy, there are multiple conspiracies being pushed forward by the defense, but they are all kind of in tension with each other. Like, is it the conspiracy to get the dog to kill him? Is it a conspiracy to kill him in the basement ahead of time? Was it a conspiracy to get him to the bar and then, like, all of a sudden, surprise, everyone come back to the Albert home and kill him there? Or was everything an accident and then the cover-up is a conspiracy? Right? These conspiracies are actually in tension with each other, and it's not clear what the story is.
And just to go back to Occam's razor on this, guys, imagine for a second someone you know died mysteriously, maybe even in your front yard. Would you just sit quietly in your house? Or would you be texting and calling everybody you know? Because I know what I would be doing. Now, maybe I would be doing the same thing if I was setting up a conspiracy. But I can tell you, if something like that happened in my life, I'd be talking to everybody. Especially if I was a cop. I'd be calling all kinds of people and texting all kinds of people. And the defense presents this as the conspiracy, and maybe it is. But what is more likely? That he's calling these people because of that? Honestly, if it was a conspiracy, what I would expect, and later on the defense is going to make these arguments, that you wouldn't talk to each other. You would not want to make these phone calls. You certainly wouldn't send texts. You do everything by voice. You know, we're going to talk about text later, and the defense is going to pick text apart. Remember, you got to believe these people are the most sophisticated conspirators in the history of conspiracies. One of these people was on the grassy knoll in 1963. I mean, that is how sophisticated they are. And yet, they're texting about the murder, right? I mean, do you believe that? And just to go back to this, because hold the defense to its story. Jen McCabe is texting John at like 12:40 and 12:45. Are you here? Where are you? She's texting him that. According to the defense, he is in the home at that time. He has been dropped off by Karen. She's gone inside. And Jen McCabe is texting this man as if he is not standing in the house. Why is she doing that? She's doing that because it's part of the conspiracy to create the aura that he never walked into that house. This was not a cover-up created after an accident. This was a premeditated cover-up to bring this man into this house and murder him. That is what they are telling you. And that is the burden they have put on themselves. Hold them to it. And when you see stuff like this, think about What is more likely, that that's what they were doing, or that this is what any person would do when something like this happened in their friend group at their house?
Are you feeling stuck in your career or lacking employment at the moment? Experiencing symptoms of job dissatisfaction? You might be suffering from a common condition known as career stagnation. But don't worry, there's a solution. Monster.com. Monster.com offers a comprehensive suite of career-boosting tools designed just for you. Our free resume review and AI interview prep tool will help you stand out from the crowd. Need more guidance? Dive into our career advice articles for expert tips and insights. And don't forget to check out our salary tools to ensure you're getting paid what you're worth. Side effects may include a new job, increased confidence, and a brighter future. Consult Monster.com today and take the first step towards your new career. Ready for your next job opportunity? Visit Monster.com now.
So then, add Brian Albert, obviously, to the conspiracy. Then we talked to Brian Albert Jr., who is about the most sympathetic 25-year-old you're ever going to see. I mean, this guy he just seems like the nicest guy. He doesn't seem like he could harm a fly, but he's going to be on this stage for the whole world. He's 25. He lives with his parents. He works in IT. He said that he had a few friends over that night of the death to celebrate his birthday, and happy birthday to you. From now on, you're going to have to remember this whole sordid affair. Most of them were his high school friends, which, I guess he's both in on the conspiracy, but not in on it enough to realize you probably shouldn't invite your random high school friends over when mom and dad are going to murder somebody in the basement. So his friends, Colin, he's over at this house. Colin arrives around 11. They drink a little bit. Some of his friends leave before midnight. Thank goodness for them, or else they would be part of the conspiracy as well. Colin's getting ready to do the same when Brian's parents arrive. Colin leaves, and Jen McCabe and her husband arrive shortly thereafter. By this point, Higgins has shown up, but he didn't really know him that well. He said the McCabes were the last to arrive, but at that point, he looks out the window, and what does he see? He notices a dark SUV pull up on the side of the street, and he didn't recognize this SUV. It moved a couple times, but no one, including him, ever saw anyone come in from that vehicle. Nobody ever saw anybody get out of that vehicle. Nobody ever walked up to the front door and walked inside. Brian, or at some point, he saw some tire tracks in the snow, which he couldn't really explain. Caitlin, his sister, was the last person to leave when her boyfriend picked her up around 2, which was when Brian went to bed. He said that John and Karen never came into the house. Brian did not wake up from the emergency vehicles when they arrived. Instead, he woke up when his dad came into his room. He did not watch what was happening outside because he has an anxiety disorder. He gets overwhelmed easily, and he knew that was going to be something that would trigger it. But Brian Albert Jr. is on our list of conspirators.
Okay, Caitlin Albert next takes the stand. Caitlin works in the Health Insurance Fraud Division of the State Attorney General, and she was at the Waterfall Bar this fateful night, and she convinced her dad to come out with them. She only knew John by reputation, that he'd taken in his niece and nephew. She never formally met John or Karen. They just kind of knew who they were. They went back home, where she saw Colin for a couple of minutes before he left. And then the defense would note that Caitlin was talking to other people, so she didn't necessarily see him leave or perhaps hide in the basement, as the defense is positing. So Caitlin stays for 2 hours, hanging out with her brother on his birthday, and then she leaves with her boyfriend. She testified that she never saw Karen or John, and she noted that it was snowing, and she was trying not to slip because of the snow outside and the wind coming down, it being dark and very windy. Now, on cross-examination, they start by talking about how no one ever interviewed Caitlin until August of 2023. And we return back to Katie McLaughlin. Now, Caitlin says she didn't consider McLaughlin as a close friend. She'd never hung out with her one-on-one. She just knew her. The defense continued to badger her on this point. Remember, this had happened earlier in the trial, and they're revisiting it with Caitlin. And I mean, honestly, the way they're badgering Caitlin, who, again, I don't know that the defense is necessarily saying she's part of the conspiracy. It seems like they're trying to say you might be kind of part of the conspiracy, but really you didn't see enough to know what was going on. But they're trying to badger her and say, like, you were best friends with McLaughlin, that's why you're part of this conspiracy. And it's got to be off-putting to the jury what the defense is doing.
And can we just talk about this for a second? How absurd this is. The weirdest thing about this, the defense, their whole argument here is basically that McLaughlin's role in this conspiracy. I mean, thank goodness she just so happened to be on duty that morning and just so happened to respond to this call so that she could do this part of the conspiracy. Her role in the conspiracy is to convert, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? To, I hit him. Think about how silly that is. Look, making this debate a central part of the case is actually brilliant on the defense's part because it doesn't matter. If she was standing there with her boyfriend in the snow with an injury saying, could I have hit him or did I hit him? That is evidence that something happened the night before that leads her to believe she was the one who caused this. Did I hit him? To me, is just as damning as her hysterically saying, I hit him. Both of them go to her state of mind. So the fact that the defense thinks that McLaughlin became a part of this conspiracy to make this very slight change, to make it a little bit worse for Karen, because now it's an admission of actual guilt as opposed to just an admission that in her mind she realizes she could have been responsible for this. It doesn't make any sense to me. But I guess, like I said, it has the jury and everyone else focusing on a question that I don't think actually matters. If Karen Reed said, could I have hit him or did I hit him that day, that is damning for her.
Absolutely. And this is tiresome because we already spent time on this earlier in the trial. Remember the whole Facebook friend thing and how close are they? And they rehash all of this with Caitlin again and McLaughlin. And Caitlin says, yeah, I've seen McLaughlin a few times since high school because we had the same social group. We live in the same town. And, you know, we had done things like attend baby showers for people we both knew because we went to high school together, that sort of thing. They referred to the two of them being in hot tubs and in bikinis.
Mrs. Brett went off at this point.
Well, I think all ladies went off because we're like, you're going to bring up my bikini photo in a hot tub? Like, I'm sorry. It's not like the two of us had our arms around each other in a hot tub. We were with a group of friends and we had on bikinis, which were just swimsuits, by the way. And it's Boston. It's cold. We were in hot tubs because it's always cold up there.
Yeah. Yeah, Mrs. Brett that was the point where she lost it with Alan Jackson. Alan Jackson, he fell off the Christmas card list at that point. And so I had to pause.
Well, she had patience
for a bit of a rant.
Fell off then.
About Alan Jackson's sexism because he's trying to paint this
did
girl.
Come off really sexist. It really did. I mean, again, obviously the jury can't talk to anyone. They're not supposed to roll their eyes. They're not supposed to show any emotion. But this has got to be off-putting for the jurors, certainly the women, because they're like, if you're going to pull some picture of me with a group of people and say somehow now we're in a conspiracy for murder, like, you better come with something much harder than that.
And in fairness to Alan Jackson, he was already off the Christmas card list.
I was going to say.
This is when Yannetti fell off the Christmas card list.
Okay, there we go. So, at one point, the defense mentions being in a kitchen with McLaughlin and others. And whenever Albert would point out that there were many friends in these photos, as we pointed out in an earlier episode, the defense counsel, Yannetti, got in a habit of saying, oh, of course. And it sounded really condescending, eventually drawing a rebuke from the judge. And that's because this is just a witness, right? Caitlin hasn't been indicted for murder or conspiracy of murder or accessory for murder. And so the attorneys questioning them should never be condescending. And it's not just us interpreting. The judge actually rebuked Yannetti, which is kind of, you have to really piss off the judge in order to do that. So after a while of this berating, the defense addressed Higgins, who Caitlin knew as a friend of her father's. She said that Higgins and her father might have been out of her sight for 5 minutes, so not a very long time. They then discussed whether she heard anything outside, which she said she did not. She also said that she didn't see John's body when they left, and I believe she was the last person to leave the house. And all of this makes no sense if this is a conspiracy of the family to frame Karen. which you'd think would also involve some sort of evidence of a car hit. You would think she would say, yeah, I saw this dark SUV. I'd never seen it before, and it just screeched out of our driveway. I looked out because I heard something hit, and I was making sure no one had hit our mailbox or our flagpole. How easy would that be to say? And all of a sudden, you're setting someone else up. You're framing someone for murder. But she says, no, I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. I don't know what's going on.
And it's a weird thing because you have the defense on the one hand who are saying, you're a part of this conspiracy to kill this man, aren't you? And then it's, now let's elicit some good testimony from you about how you didn't actually hear or see anything that made you think there was a man dying on your front lawn. And they all answer the same way, with the exception of one person who says she thought she saw something. Everybody else is like, yeah, no indication whatsoever that this happened.
And then if that wasn't enough to show some nefarious ties between her and some person she went to high school with in bikinis and hot tubs, Yannetti then also brings out the fact that Caitlin knew Trooper Proctor's sister. She said, yes, I'd been in her company a couple of times. I met her kids once when Julie Albert had Courtney's kids in the back seat, and she saw her, but they weren't particularly close. In fact, she said she'd never met Michael Proctor, the lead investigator on the case. And again, the whole point of this line of questioning is to show that they are all intertwined. They know the Proctors know the Alberts, and they're all in the cahoots to cover up and frame Karen.
And, Caitlin Albert's an interesting one. I think she has to be part of the conspiracy because of the McLaughlin stuff. I think if you're developing your own conspiracy theory and not following the defense's conspiracy theory, Caitlin might actually not be a conspirator. You might be able to come up with a way to keep her out. But I think based on what the defense is saying...
Right? Like with how weak that McLaughlin thing... The amount of time they spend on the connection, it means that they're trying to make her part of the conspiracy. Because it's so weak, I would minimize her role and say, you didn't see anything. You don't know anything. You were just focused on yourself and your boyfriend.
I mean, she has to be a part of it, right? Because Katie McLaughlin is not going to try and frame some random woman when some random guy dies just because, that's where my former track teammate lives. Just in case she has some involvement in this, I guess I should frame somebody. Well, this woman seems hysterical. I'm going to say she said she did it and just hope that lines up with the evidence. She's not going to do that. Someone had to reach out to her at some point and say, hey, we really need you to say this is what happened.
Dude, because remember that time when we were in bikinis in the hot tub? You owe me one.
Yeah, you had a beer and I had my arm around you. That we're so close. I mean, we're Facebook friends, by God. Like, you owe me. That means something in my world. I mean, that's
we need a shirt. We need a shirt that says, "You have to help me bury a body. We're Facebook friends."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's essentially where we're at in this case. Okay, so now my favorite witness of all testifies. This has been my favorite, Tristan Morris. Tristan Morris, who could not give less of a crap about being there and has no time for anybody in this courthouse, and is going to deliver the line of the trial. So Morris is Caitlin's boyfriend. He is a union pipe fitter, and I feel like I'd like to hang out with Tristan. He was at the bar, but he didn't stay long because he had a job plowing streets, and he figured he's going to be up the next morning plowing, so he wants to get some sleep. So eventually he would go to pick up Caitlin at her parents' home, and he doesn't see anything. He says Caitlin was normal when he arrived. Now, on cross-examination, Tristan says he never really talked to law enforcement until he was getting ready for his testimony. He also reiterates he didn't see anything. He wasn't really paying attention to the front lawn as he was driving away. So the defense, first they almost try and make him part of the conspiracy because they show a photograph and they're like, in this photograph that was taken several weeks later, you're with all these Albert men and you have your fist up, don't you? And it's like, what is this, like they're celebrating the beating of John with the fist up thing? And so they try and like bring him in, but he's like, I don't know. That's just what the picture we took. Right? I mean, he's like completely laid back guy.
And can we talk about, let's talk about a conspiracy that makes sense. If Caitlin is the linchpin to get McLaughlin to be part of this conspiracy and to cover up, why leave? She should be there when McLaughlin gets there so she could do the wink and the nod and be like, remember what we talked about? Look at the picture of the hot tub. Remember the hot tub, right? Like, why would she leave? It just, none of this ties together. And Tristan is really funny.
And so Tristan, the defense is trying to get Tristan. They're like, why, you said you needed sleep. Why would you come get her at that time? You had to drive back and forth from your apartment 15 minutes away and it's snowing. You got to get up early. And finally, Kristen just says, look, Caitlin's high maintenance. And it was better just to go get her than to have to deal with her and whatever she's going to complain about later, making him the most believable witness to testify so far. Yeah. And I'm going to say, I'm going to give the defense the benefit of the doubt, despite the fist photo, that Tristan is not part of this conspiracy. He is just, at best, conspiracy adjacent, but I'm not even going to say that. I'm just going to say Tristan, he just happens to be the boyfriend.
Honestly, probably the first person that we can squarely put into that bucket, because everybody else, So next is Sarah Levinson. Sarah was at the Alberts for Brian Jr.'s birthday, and she testified that this is so Boston, they were eating calzones and drinking, and everyone was happy. The mood was upbeat. Colin came by, who was in high school at the time, and she knew him as the younger brother of someone she went to high school with. So the group from the Waterfall Bar came home, and other than generally knowing who these people were, Sarah didn't have much interaction with the McCabe's or the Alberts. It's kind of like there's two groups here, right? Like the kids celebrating 25-year-old Brian Albert's birthday and all his friends, and then like the adults, right? I mean, even though 25 is an adult, the parents are coming home, and they're two separate groups. And she testified that Colin left around when everyone else arrived, and she never saw anyone go into the basement of the home, and she herself left the house between 1:30 and 2 a.m. She said that she saw neither Karen Reed nor John O'Keefe, and Brian Albert and Brian Higgins were hanging out in the kitchen where she was. Jen McCabe, she said, kept checking her phone, saying she was expecting someone else to come. At some point, the McCabes actually drove Levinson and her friend home. Now, Sarah was paying attention to where she was walking because she'd worn shoes her mother told her not to wear that had no traction. So that was her focus because of the snow and the ice and her footwear that mom had warned her against. Now, they were focused on the back seat because there was a lone loaf of bread, and Jen made a joke about making everyone eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
So once again, here, a couple of your conspirators, the girl who talks about the shoes her mom told her not to wear because they were going to be slippery on the ice, but she wore them anyway. And Jen, who's just finished murdering one of her friends, making jokes about peanut butter sandwiches. That's what's going on with the conspiracy at this point.
And it's raining men. Very serious conspirators here.
Yes.
Or like complete heartless psychotic people.
Oh, these people
right?
are psychopaths. I mean,
psychopaths. We are killing a man with a 70-pound dog and talking about peanut butter jelly sandwiches and dancing to It's Raining Men. Now, on cross-examination, the defense focused on Sarah's longstanding relationship or friendship with the Alberts and Jen McCabe. And they noted how she hadn't been interviewed until 9 months after John's death, and that she didn't see Colin Albert physically walk out the door when he left, meaning she may not actually know where he went. And this suggested that the fact everyone was singing and dancing and having a good time was to cover up the murder that was happening in the house. Honestly, this seemed absurd even as they were asking it because, of course, Sarah was like, what are you talking about? That is not what happened whatsoever. So this was an opportunity for the defense to put forward their conspiracy theory, which Sarah did not help them with.
And you got to hope. You just got, when you're forming the conspiracy and you want to get Colin downstairs, instead of making sure the house is empty, instead of telling everybody we're going to go back where Brian Albert Jr. is celebrating his birthday, you actually know that Brian went out with his friends. And you walk into a darkened home and John's like, what's going on? And then you attack him. Instead of doing that, the party's going, and you just have to hope that nobody saw Colin slip down into the basement. Because otherwise, the whole jig is up. And this is the sort of alternative. The defense is working these two sides of this. On the one hand, everybody's in on the conspiracy. On the other hand, the conspiracy is happening downstairs with some limited number of conspirators: Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, Colin, Chloe, Jen McCabe, maybe some others. But people like Sarah are not involved in it. And they sort of leave that as a possibility because Sarah seems completely unlikely to be a part of this conspiracy.
If anything, she came to the conspiracy completely not dressed for it because she was in shoes that didn't even have traction. If she was supposed to be part of moving a body or something, she came with the wrong footwear.
And on the one hand, I want to not include Sarah in the conspiracy because she so obviously is not part of it. But on the other hand, it is so bizarre to include a random teenager. I mean, I guess she was in her early 20s at this time. At the house, at the time, you're pulling off this massive conspiracy when she easily could blow everything up. Or her friend.
And give her a ride home. Right? Like the person who's like at the center of the conspiracy, Jen McCabe, is joking with her and giving her a ride home. Why? If she's not part of the conspiracy, there's so much evidence she could be picking up on. She's going to be interviewed after the fact because Jen will certainly be caught as part of this conspiracy. And here you have like a witness in the back, of your car who can see the state of your car and the loaf of bread and the scratches on your body, what have you. It makes really no sense. You're not looking to add witnesses who can testify against you unless they're just part of the conspiracy. But why is she part of the conspiracy? What's her role? Having bad footwear?
Maybe this was to figure out whether or not she had heard anything. And if she had, she's going to have to kill 2 more people. Julie Nagel, who we're going to talk about in a second, and Sarah. Unfortunately, they heard what was going on downstairs. Like if they had said, I heard this dog barking. It sounded like somebody was fighting downstairs. Then Jen and her husband would have been like, I wish you hadn't said that. Yeah. I mean, that's where we would be. And that brings us to Julie Nagel. Nagel was also at Brian's with Sarah for the party. Her dad had drove her. Nothing like having your dad drive you over to a murder party. Colin came by and left around midnight, maybe a little bit earlier, and she remembered Colin leaving. The Waterfall group arrived around the same time. By the way, all these stories lining up. So, if Sarah and Julie aren't part of the conspiracy, it's interesting that they are telling the exact same stories that all the murderers are telling. But sure enough, they are. Colin leaves. No one, not a single person, no matter how related or unrelated they are to this conspiracy, says that Colin was there past about midnight. But anyways, so at this point, Brian lets Chloe out back, which is consistent with what he said. At some point, he used the bathroom and then took the dog back upstairs, which is consistent with what he said. And I guess, he snuck the dog upstairs. And at some point, when nobody was looking, he brought the dog back down and got her downstairs and prepped for the big attack that's coming. So she stays until around 1:45, and everyone was having a great time. And, neither Reed nor O'Keefe ever came into the house, according to her, which is the other thing. Not only did we sneak the dog down into the basement and sneak Colin down into the basement to prep him, but somehow we snuck John into the house, who had no idea he was walking into a murder scene. And this goes back to those of you who want to say this wasn't a conspiracy that was concocted before it happened. If John walked into that house and wasn't immediately murdered in the basement, what would he have done? He would have done things like say, hey guys, he would have done things like walk into the kitchen and get a drink and have some pretzels and dance to It's Raining Men. He would have done all those things, and these people would have seen him. They don't see him, which means he must have been directed into the basement immediately, and somehow nobody noticed he was there, even though the defense likes to point out, no one saw a 6'2" man laying in the snow out front. Well, apparently no one saw him walk through the front door either. Even these people who the defense cannot bring themselves to include them in the conspiracy. I will say, in his defense, Turtle Boy, who thinks everybody's part of the conspiracy, but the defense, this is a bridge too far for them to actually accuse these girls of being part of the conspiracy, but they also missed all of this stuff that was happening, and lucky for them they did, because then who knows what would have happened to them. At some point, she does notice a black SUV she didn't recognize. She saw it in 3 different spots at various points. First, it was in front of the mailbox. Then it pulled up a little bit further. Then it was in front of the flagpole. Now, her brother had arrived at some point, and she had gone outside to speak with him and tell him that she'd been staying a little bit longer. He was supposed to be her ride for the night, but she's not ready to go home. She wants to have a few more drinks. And the murder cabal, despite the fact they're fixing to murder a man, don't insist that she leaves. So when she wants to stay longer, they're like, hey, sure, why not? A couple more people. So, and in fact, as we've mentioned, it will be the McCabe's who will give her a ride home. Now, as their vehicle passes the house, she is sitting behind the driver, and she is looking at Sarah, who's sitting in the backseat passenger seat. And as she's looking at her, she also sees what the vehicle is passing. You know, Jen McCabe is turned around talking to them. Her husband is driving. She's looking out the passenger side of the vehicle, and she sees what she describes as a black blob by the flagpole, in the flagpole area, as they drove by. This would have been around 1:30, 1:45. It was close to the street, but it was on the lawn, and she said out loud, "I think I might have seen something. I'm not sure what that was." But she was drunk, and Sarah asked her, "What are you talking about?" And she just let it go.
If she's not part of the conspiracy and McCabe just heard her say that, that's the cue. Because now Sarah has heard it, even though Sarah said she heard nothing inside. Now Sarah heard what her friend is saying. What do? Like, kill them both? Silence them? Because that's not good.
Well, it could have been her, because I don't know what she saw, or she's just making this up, because our friendly snowplow driver, who was so observant that he's going to run into a basketball goal that night, did not see a body in the lawn when he passed by. So therefore, there couldn't have been a body in the lawn, and either she didn't say this, or it was just a shadow. It's a little unclear what, but for whatever reason, Jen decides, not to pull the trigger on her. Either way, she sees this. She doesn't know what it is. On cross, the defense is going to point out that she was good friends with Brian Albert Jr. and known him for his whole life, which is like, now you're going into conspiracy territory, guys, because what you seem to be implying is that she would lie to protect Brian Albert Jr. And I think because she saw the black blob, unlike Sarah, who they can not include in the conspiracy, she is, she's given some pretty bad testimony against them. So it's a little unclear. Maybe she's telling this lie to protect the Alberts. They press her on whether it was possible something could have happened in the basement. Maybe she wouldn't even hear it because of the music. This is something they're going to come back to multiple times. The defense, in one of the more despicable moments to me, it goes to this whole guilt trip about how she didn't do anything. She saw this thing on the lawn and she didn't do anything, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say that she struggles with that fact. And that is something that weighs on her, that if she had just said something, maybe she could have saved this man's life. But that is a line of questioning that she gets hit on for quite some time. And they also question her why she didn't say anything until she was interviewed later by Trooper Proctor, why she didn't call 911 the next day. Calling 911 the next day probably wouldn't have done much good anyway. And obviously Proctor interviewed her for a reason. I think he knew what she was going to say.
Okay, next up is Terry Kuhn. Kuhn is a veterinary forensic specialist at UC Davis, and she established the forensic lab and she trains all of the employees. She's an expert, right? There have been allegations that the wounds on John O'Keefe's arms are from a dog bite. That's why the defense keeps bringing up Chloe. Now, Kuhn analyzed DNA swabs from John, and they were negative for canine DNA. They were actually pig DNA, most likely from food, though. On cross-examination, the defense noted that she was not present when the swabs were taken, which honestly most experts or medical examiners are not. They get sent the swabs. And I mean, I think that's true in all of our cases. And I suppose evidence that the lab or the ME or the collecting doctor was involved in the conspiracy. I guess that's what that line of questioning has to imply. So where they found the pig to swab, who can say? Why a pig? That seems very hard to explain. Why not cat, for example, or a possum, which will come into play later. So the defense suggested that the pig DNA could have been from, say, dog treats. Though, if that were the case, you'd expect to see dog DNA too, because the dog eats the treats, bites the person, hence you get the pig dog treat DNA, as well as the canine DNA. But that's not the case. Alternatively, the defense suggests maybe the dog just clawed him instead of bit him. Still doesn't explain the pig DNA. Now, you can look at the picture of John's arms, and while there are certainly markings on the arm, they don't appear to be puncture wounds like fang marks or like a canine dog bite. it really does look like scratches and like long scratches, right? If the teeth had made contact with the arm, they would have kind of dragged downwards as opposed to puncture in to hold on. I don't see any puncture holds where, especially when it comes to German Shepherds, if they are trained as canines, you've probably seen the videos of them coming at your arm where there's like a big wrapper around your arm to protect the person who's training the dog. And their job is to clamp on and then stay clamped on. You can see, videos of people swinging the dogs around and they don't let go, because that's how they bring down people, is to not let go, and the force of their bite eventually brings them down. That's not what I see in this photo here.
Yeah, and I got lots to say about the dog thing later on. There's going to be plenty of opportunities to talk about dogs. Since we're going a little long, I will not address the dog theory, but we will have more chances to talk about that, and I have a lot to say. Okay, so they talked to this expert because this was the only time this person could appear. So this often happens. So she sort of gives her evidence, and then we go back into the timeline. And the people, we're going to talk about 3 more witnesses very quickly, and then we'll wrap up today. These are the witnesses who were in the truck who came to pick up Julie Nagel, and they have some interesting things to say. Ryan Nagel is the brother of Julie. He testifies to seeing Julie Nagel is the person who testified to seeing that dark object. So he was out that night at various bars. He received a text around midnight from his sister to come to the Albert home to pick him up. He said as he and his friends were heading to Fairview Road, they noticed a black SUV coming towards them. They allowed the SUV to turn in front of them. They stopped in front of the driveway while the SUV was roughly a car length ahead of them. No one got out of the SUV during the 2 minutes they waited on Julie to come outside. Now, when she did come out, she asked them if they wanted to come in, but they wanted to call it a night, which is a good thing for them, or they would also have been part of the conspiracy. As he spoke to his sister, the SUV's brake lights came on, and it moved further away from them. His sister went back inside, and they pulled away from the curb. As they drove past the SUV, the interior light was on. There was a woman in the driver's seat with long hair, looking straight ahead. They gave it a glance as they drove by and went on. On cross, Nagel was asked if he noticed any damage to the tail light of the vehicle. He said he did not, but it was dark and he wasn't paying much attention. He also said he didn't see another man in the car or anyone in the yard. He also said he did not see anyone get out of that car and walk to the front door and go inside.
Okay. Just a couple more people. Heather Maxon. Maxon was Ryan's girlfriend at the time, and she was in the truck with Nagel at the time he went to speak to his sister. And when the SUV turned in front of them, on to Fairview, she testified that she saw a woman driving and a male in the passenger seat. So they ended up parking behind this SUV that they let turn in front of them, and there was no damage to it, and no one got out or went into the house. She also did not see any man as they passed by. Contrary to everyone else, she never saw the SUV move. Now, we've talked about direct evidence and memories being different, especially if this is kind of an eventless thing, right? It's not like they saw the car really move. They let this car move in front of them. The fact that she remembers seeing it at all years later, I think is actually a little bit impressive. So also in the truck with them was Richard D'Antono. He was the one who was actually driving the truck, and he remembered this vehicle being 10 to 20 yards in front of them, this dark SUV. He did not recall it moving, and he didn't notice any damage to the car. He said the car was running, but no one got out of it. And they did talk to Ryan's sister for maybe about 2 minutes. Ryan says it was less than a minute. Heather says 5 minutes. Again, direct evidence is just memory. So I think the point is, it wasn't a very long conversation. It's not like they sat down and had a life discussion about what she wanted to see in the next 5 to 10 years of her life for 30 minutes. So something between 1 and 5 minutes. And then Ryan's sister went back inside, and during this whole conversation, however long it was, Richard testified he did not see anyone get out of that SUV that they were behind.
And I think, these guys, they testify basically to talk about the SUV showing up, and it's, pretty clearly Karen's car. But what I thought was fascinating about it is you have 3 people who are obviously not involved in the conspiracy, and the discrepancies in their story, because that's real life. The defense and a lot of the people who have defended Karen Read will focus incessantly on the inconsistencies between the various people's stories from that night. We always tell you, expect inconsistencies. If you see no inconsistencies, you got a real problem, because that's when you got people lining up their stories. But when you see inconsistencies, what you're seeing is human memory. These folks are kind of all over the place. 3 people in the same truck for the same period of time. They miss things. They mistake things. None of them, for instance, notice Brian Higgins' Jeep. Brian Higgins has a Jeep with a plow on the front of it. And none of them see that. It was there. Everybody agrees it was already there. None of them see that. They're all asked about it, and they're like, no, I don't remember that. And it's just so funny to me how this works. And it's just an important thing to remember when you're talking about these kind of details. Okay, so that's what we have for now. Just want to say, if you're listening to this in real time, now's the time to turn it off. Because as we record this, the case is wrapping up. And we expect there'll be a verdict within the next week or so. And so what we'd like to do is give you sort of a brief idea on both our thoughts about what happened, what the jury is going to do, and what the evidence shows. So I'm going to give you a moment to go ahead and turn it off. We'll see you guys next week when we do episode 6. I'm Brett. That's Alice. We're the prosecutors. Okay, there you go. Cue the music. Okay, so for those of you who stuck around, at this point, we've got the entire prosecution story. The defense is putting on some of their experts. The prosecution did this in a certain way. They started by putting on all the witnesses who are the apparent conspirators. Watch their testimony. Honestly, if you see their testimony and you still believe this is a conspiracy, then good for you. Go with God. But these people do not come off as conspirators. They do not come off as though they're lying. Everything they say is generally backed up by independent things. So I'm going to talk about Jen McCabe. We haven't talked about her yet in sort of our episodes, but there are just a few things about her testimony. One of them is these text messages she's sending to John. Her text messages line up with when Karen would have arrived there and when this incident would have happened. As I said earlier in this episode, around 12:41, 12:45, when, according to Jen, at that point, she doesn't even know if the car's still out there. And in fact, it has already left. She's texting, "Are you here? Where are you?" Right? If you believe the conspiracy theory, then as I said before, you have to believe that John is standing in that house and she is texting that, already building this conspiracy. They have already decided they're going to frame Karen Reed, and this entire thing has begun. That seems entirely unlikely, and it also means this would have been a premeditated attack. There's no evidence of a premeditated attack. There's no evidence that anything ever happened in that house. There's no evidence that John ever went in the house. If you look at John's cell phone data, it is pretty clear he never went in that house. His phone stopped moving at around the time that Jen is texting him to park behind her car. 12:30 or so. I forget the exact time. We're going to talk about it later. His phone stops moving. 12:31, his phone stops moving. And based on the cell phone pings, he never goes inside the house. What happened is by that point, he had been hit by this SUV. Was he dead? I don't know. He had stopped moving at 12:31. That doesn't mean that's when he was hit. We also have the data that shows Karen Reed's vehicle moving backwards at an excessive speed. And then immediately after that, what does Karen start doing? She starts leaving incredibly angry messages on John's cell phone, cursing him, calling him a pervert, all sorts of things. At 1 o'clock, she's leaving messages about how no one knows where he is, which doesn't make any sense unless you tie that to something she tells Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts the next day, which is that she left him at the bar. That is her first story, that she left John at the bar. That was going to be her cover story. The 1 o'clock phone call where she says no one knows where you are is to set up that after she left him at the bar, she doesn't know where he went. Unfortunately for her, it is very quickly made clear that people saw her vehicle at that house, and she has to change that story, but she's already left those voicemails. I think Karen probably was pretty sure that she had hit John at that point. I think she did it in a rage. I think they got in a fight on the way over. She was very drunk. He got out of the car. How exactly he got hit, whether he was bending over or he dropped his drink or whatever, I don't know, but she backed into him, she hit him, and she left him there to die. That's what I think happened. The question I think that's more interesting is whether or not the jury is going to find her guilty of second-degree murder. I will say two things. Number one, if they acquit her, it is because of Trooper Proctor's testimony, which we're going to talk about. That's why they will do it. They will acquit her because of that reason. I think what they're going to do is find her guilty of vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene. I don't think they'll find her guilty of second-degree murder, but I could be surprised. If they do find her guilty of second-degree murder, the fault lies entirely on her defense team.
Yeah, we had not talked about this beforehand because I didn't even know we were recording today, but that, but that actually aligns with what I was thinking I would end up with. Except to kind of clarify, I think if she's acquitted, it would be because of Proctor's bad actions, but not because, I mean, you can't get into the jury's mind, but I don't actually think the acquittal would be because they don't believe that Karen hit her, but rather it's like jury nullification because these cops suck and shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. And therefore, because they've messed this up so badly, there were so many bad actions by Proctor that she shouldn't get convicted. Of course, we would never know that because they don't have to explain themselves. But I think the evidence is absolutely there that she was the one who hit him and that there was not a conspiracy. I think it's going to be a little bit tough because I think it's hard to show, based on all the testimony, that she was plotting to kill him all night. You know, like they were drinking, but emotions seem to be good. Now, anything can happen from the time you leave the bar and whatever happened in that car. Clearly something happened, right? Because she peeled out of there going 24 miles per hour. That's not how you regularly leave, especially on a snowy night. So I do think there was some event that happened between them that caused emotions to flare up. And I can imagine that because of the confusion of what exactly happened, the jury will not be willing to convict on second-degree murder because I think the intent may be difficult for them to arrive at when it is clear that she's the one who hit him. And isn't that enough? I can see the jury saying that.
Yeah. So there you go, guys. We're laying this out there for you before the jury said anything. So we're either going to be idiots or we're going to be geniuses. If we're geniuses, this will stay in.
I won't leave you to hang out there by yourself. I think she knew what she did. And I don't think she was so foggy that she didn't know until the next morning. I think she knew what happened that night. And I think her texts show that. But maybe her drunken state made it so it didn't sink in a way where she properly freaked out, if that makes sense. And we can talk about this when we ultimately get there, but like, how culpable are you if you're really drunk, so drunk that you shouldn't be able to drive a car? Can you kill someone? Yes, absolutely, you can. And I think her actions show that she didn't black out. She knew what was going on at the time, and her actions led to his death. And she knew it at the time.
Yeah, and look, I think there are a couple of ways to explain her angry messages that she leaves. One of them is she doesn't know she hit him, and she's just mad at him. But that's why she hit him, because she was mad, and she peeled off to make a point. Like, oh, you want to stay here at the party? Fine, stay. I'm leaving, you know. And she peels off to make a point. The other one is that the anger led her to hit him, but now she is projecting blame on him. This is his fault. This is your fault. I hit you because it's your fault, because you're a pervert and you're awful and I hate you. And all the stuff that she said in those messages right after she left was her channeling what she had done and blaming him for it. And you see that so often in these domestic abuse situations where the abuser, which obviously she is in this case, is projecting onto the victim. This is your fault. Why'd you make me hit you? I mean, just a classic line, right? I mean, that's essentially what you can see her doing. Now, she is drunk, very drunk. I think she was very drunk. I think the intent question is a hard question. And if the defense had not chosen to go the conspiracy way, in so many ways, this would have been a really interesting trial if they had focused on that. If they'd have just said, look, she wasn't drunk, number one. This was an accident, number two, and you shouldn't find her guilty of anything. That, to me, would have been more interesting than what we have, which is a train wreck. But maybe, like I said, by the time y'all are listening to this, if we don't edit it all out, the jury will have acquitted her. Yeah, the jury will have acquitted her, and she'll be on Good Morning America talking about, you know, her book deal and movie tour, and
let's put it this way:
lawyers will be geniuses.
The jury, we have always said the jury is a black box. Even if the jury acquits, she still did it. I think the evidence still points to it was her. It was not a conspiracy. So I'll go out there and say that. Whether they come back convicting her or acquitting her, that doesn't change the fact that I think the evidence clearly points to she is the cause of his death.
And it also doesn't change the fact that the McCabe's and the Alberts have been slandered for 2 years. And what happened to them is an absolute disgrace because they are not involved in this. They did not kill their friend in frame, Karen Reed. That is absurd. It is stupid. Anyone who believes that needs to reevaluate their priorities in life. That is not what happened. It didn't happen. There's no way it happened. It's silly to even think it happened. and the fact that you got people who were 17 or 18 years old at the time having to bear the burden of being a part of this conspiracy is just disgusting to me. And it's everything that's wrong with how we cover these cases. And I hope that they can get some kind of justice, that their names can be cleared. Like, where do they go to get their reputations back? They're going to be tarred with this for the rest of their lives. Frankly, whether she's convicted or not, there will always be people who believe that that family gathered together at that home and conspired to murder this man and frame an innocent woman for it, and that is terrible.
On Brian Jr.'s birthday. Like forever.
On his birthday. Yeah.
I mean, truly forever his birthday is going to be a horrible reminder of how their entire community was dragged through this faux conspiracy theory and blasted all over national television. We'll talk more about this, I'm sure, when we reach the end. But yes, so there you go. There you have our predictions.
Yeah. So those of you who are going to be with us for like 5 more episodes of this, not to give it away, it's going to end.
But we just did give it away.
And look, I mean, I will say this. We're going to continue to look at this, and my opinions are always shaped by discussions with Alice. I could end up thinking she is guilty of second-degree murder, and then it's very clear, whatever the jury says. But I will say right now, that is my conflict, is she guilty of manslaughter or is she guilty of second-degree murder? And I'm interested to see how this case ends up. All right, well, we've been going a long time. I'm going to cut it off. Alice didn't even know she was recording tonight, so she needs to go to bed. So we'll do questions next time. You know how to find us, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Join us on Patreon. If you're on Patreon, you know our thoughts on this case like 4 weeks ahead of time. You could be here live talking about this, but you're not. Join us. Be with us. Okay. Alice, anything else before we sign off?
Sorry, guys. Sorry to know we were recording tonight, but you get to see me in my real state. I'll say that much.
You did beautifully, Alice. You killed it. Killed every minute of it. Okay, guys. We'll be back next week with more on the Karen Reed trial. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
So then moving on, who's Alan?
Alan Jackson.
Alan
the
Jackson.
attorney.
Sorry.
Oh, actually, no, I messed that up.
Yeah, I was like, sorry.
No, it's
When Brian got home.
Brian,
right?
yeah.
So when Brian, perfectly fine. He's a married woman. They have 5 children. This is their home.
Well, he's a married man, but...
Sorry. What did I say?
He said he was a married woman.
I'm sorry. I did not mean to say that. I didn't know we were recording until 40 minutes ago.
Okay.
I can't believe I didn't know we were recording. I feel so bad. That was like the ultimate goof up of this week. I barely held it together this week. There were so many filing deadlines. There were so many things happening. And I was like, I'm doing it. And then I miss alive.